Singapore, the headlines. A hung parliament in Italy with a combination of right-wing parties set to get most votes. But it's Five Star, Italy's newest party led by Luigi Di Maio, who may be the biggest single in parliament.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also in this programme, delegates at China's annual parliamentary session are expected to stamp a proposal allowing President Xi Jinping to rule for life. And as stars get red carpet red of the Oscars, while the Harvey Weinstein allegations overshadow the film's biggest event of the year.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London and 2 a.m. in Rome, where exit polls suggest no group has won a majority in the country's general election. The populist Five Star Movement is predicted to be the largest single party in the new parliament, with Italian media saying it's won 29% of the vote. That's 9 points more than the centre-left. The polls are just that, exit predictions, but they suggest the Five Star Movement will end up with 34% of the vote. The centre-left Democratic Party of Prime Minister Renzi is projected to get 18.1%. And the Anti-Immigrant League at 15.8%. It's unclear if Forza Italia of the former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi with 13.9% will be the single biggest party within the centre-right coalition. Well, Angela Guifrillado is a freelance journalist with the Guardian newspaper in London. She told my colleague Karen Giannoni that the Five Star vote has lived up to expectations.
Well, the Five Star have performed pretty much how we expected them to perform. Even better than the polls had predicted before they closed a couple of weeks ago. I think what we can say now, and this is pretty much what a lot of people were discussing during the campaign, you know, as much as people were discussing the pre-vote coalitions, they were also discussing the post-vote coalitions. Now, the Cinque Stelle, so Five Star Movement, they've always been against forming a coalition, but in recent weeks, Luigi Di Maio, their leader, has conceded that depending on the day of the vote, depending on how much we get, we would be open to seeking partners after the vote, but on condition that they would abide by the Five Star rules or programme. So it remains to be seen who they could partner with. So it's very much all to play for.
How much has it been a concern, for example, in Europe, around the world, the financial markets, looking at Italy, looking at the rise of populism and of the anti-establishment forces that we've seen in these recent months?
I think it has been a concern, but when you look at a party or a movement like the Five Star Movement, they were against, they were very much anti-Europe at the beginning, and I remember maybe a little while after the Brexit vote, they started to distance themselves a little bit from that rhetoric. So now they haven't been as big a concern. I think the biggest concern would be, let's say now they form a partnership, and who would be their most likely partner? Some people have mooted the Lega, which at the moment is in a coalition with Berlusconi's party, Forza Italia.
And they're far to the right.
Yes, exactly. So if the Lega performs more strongly than the Forza Italia, there's a suggestion that they could pair up with the Five Star Movement, which would obviously create an anti. The Lega is against Europe. They want a referendum on Italy's membership of the Euro, and then we have the far right movement, which in the past has and now it's suggesting that actually we would rather reforms in Europe, and that a referendum on the Euro would be a last resort. But who knows what would happen if they pair up with the Lega.
They're speaking to my colleague Karin Giannoni, and of course we'll get some more analysis on what the results could mean for Italy and for Europe a little later on the programme. First of all, though, let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories. And South Korea is sending a high-level delegation to North Korea on Monday for talks. Now, the discussions are expected to focus on the prospect of resuming dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington. Now, that delegation is expected to travel to the United States.
The delegation will discuss conditions for a North Korea-US dialogue on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and improvement of relations between North and South Korea. The delegation will return on the afternoon of 6th March and report on the results. After that, they will travel to the United States to brief the officials there.
Now, also making news today, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has said that the offensive in eastern Ghouta must continue as his government forces advanced into the rebel-held enclave. Mr. Assad said that the humanitarian situation that the West was talking about was a lie. In a strong condemnation, the US said that innocent civilians were being killed in the assault. A 6-magnitude earthquake has hit Papua New Guinea, which is struggling to cope with the aftermath of a 7.5-magnitude earthquake just last week. Aid workers with much-needed supplies have yet to reach tens of thousands of people. No official death toll has been released, but local media report at least 50 people were killed. That is expected to rise. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia has arrived in Egypt. It's his first foreign trip since he became heir to the throne. Prince Mohammed was welcomed at Cairo airport by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Saudi Arabia and Egypt are close allies. Tributes are being paid to Sir Roger Bannister, the first man to run a mile in under 4 minutes, who has died at the age of 88. Now, he made history with that feat in 1954, yet deemed his greatest achievement to be his work as a neurologist. The head of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe, said that Sir Roger Bannister made the impossible possible.
Now, thousands of delegates from all over China are arriving for the 13th National People's Congress, the country's parliament. They'll spend the next 2 weeks discussing legislation, but one proposal delegates are expected to vote on has the world watching. It's the changes to the constitution that will give the Communist Party more control than ever and give one man, President Xi Jinping, the potential to rule for life. The official Xinhua news agency has also announced that China will increase its defense spending by just over 8% in 2018, giving its military budget a higher boost than last year. Well, for the latest, the BBC's Stephen McDonnell joins me live from Beijing. We also saw a bit of a warning towards, I guess, Taiwan that any separatist activities won't be tolerated. What are the latest from the meeting?
Yes, well, you mentioned the defence budget. If the figures are to be believed, China's defence budget up by 8%. That's more than 7% last year, which was a drop on, for many years before, double-digit figures. Now, the reason we know this is because the way it works here on the opening day of the Congress is the Premier gets up and delivers what's called the Government Work Report, and that's what he's doing right now in the Great Hall of the people behind me, and this will go on for hours. He just reads out the whole report. Now, journalists will race in there, they get the physical written copies of the report and pour through it and quickly fire out figures. So we're starting to get some information. I've not physically gone in and grabbed the report yet because it's just been handed out. But so, for example, the defence figure comes out, and people right now, as the Premier is speaking, are pouring through, looking at, you know, the figures for projected GDP growth, you name it. And so in the coming hours we'll hear more and more of that.
Of course, one topic that's been dominating news headlines has been this change, or the proposed change to the constitution that would give President Xi Jinping potential to rule for life. There have been some social media reaction, but I guess that's going to go ahead?
Yeah, there's no doubt the National People's Congress here will approve that change. The Congress has never rejected anything that the Communist Party has put up, and that's how the system works. Party leaders come up with ideas, then it goes through the Congress effectively for ratification. Now, at times there have been a protest vote, for example, over the Three Gorges Dam or other contentious matters, so we'll see if there is some sort of a protest vote on it. But I think in all likelihood we are going to see this change, and Xi Jinping will be able to be president for as long as he likes. I mean, I should add it's a bit complicated because he could have stayed on anyway, you know, in these other guises as the chairman of the party or the head of the Central Military Commission. These are these other positions he has. But I think the fact that they're making this change does indicate, firstly, that he wants to be called president, and secondly, that I think there's little doubt Xi Jinping is going to hang around beyond his 2 terms, and who knows for how long.
Stephen McDonnell in Beijing, thank you.
Now let's return to our top story, the Italian general election, where the anti-establishment Five Star movement says that it may hold the balance of power. No grouping has won an outright majority, and Five Star, which was established less than 10 years ago, has emerged as the single biggest party. Well, let's get some more analysis. We're joined by Edoardo Bressanelli, senior lecturer in European politics at King's College London. So no real surprise that Italy is once again looking at a coalition, but what Five Star has achieved, now that is surprising.
And that's impressive. 35%, almost 35% according to the polls, that's to the exit polls, that's an impressive result. They are by far, by distance, the first party, but now the question really is who's joining the Five Star movement in a possible government for Italy.
Now, initially they had said that they would not form a coalition, they were not interested in forming a coalition, but that's changed now, so that could move around.
Yes, they made also a very smart strategic move. They said, that's our government, so they presented a government, but the question is, who's going to join a government led by the Five Star movement? It's a government based on their own condition and their leadership. So they have to find partners. It's not going to be easy.
What about the right centre, the right grouping? Of course, we were always thinking about Silvio Berlusconi as the kingmaker, but that's changed given the results that Forza Italia has received.
They are neck and neck, so we shall see the real votes when they come through. But Forza Italia and the League, led by Matteo Salvini, are very close. It may be that Silvio Berlusconi has finally lost his magic touch on Italian politics. It does seem that within the centre-right, Matteo Salvini is now the leader of that coalition.
So how will the groupings, how do you project that they will work? Well, what kind of a coalition are we realistically looking at?
First of all, you need to count the votes, because the electoral law is very complex. We're looking at the shares of votes now, but it's based on a purely proportional law, which is 2/3 of the seats. Then there is a quota, 1/3 of the seats roughly, which is a first past the post. So we shall see who's winning the seats and in which part of the country. That's going to make a difference.
But regardless of how it's formed, we're talking about a rather Eurosceptic formation here, a Eurosceptic government for Italy.
If you just count the share, and if you sum up the Five Star movement, the Northern League and the Brothers of Italy, who are really on the extreme right of the policy spectrum, that, well, they have a majority. Now the question is, will they group up and form a government? Well, that's difficult to say, but certainly a majority of Italians have voted for anti-European or at least Eurosceptic parties.
Now, EU budgets were blamed for the economic situation that Italy finds itself, a lack of jobs, and of course immigration was a problem. For the rest of Europe, should they be concerned about the formation? What will happen next?
I think Europe has to be really concerned, because this is another big result from the third largest economy in the euro area. And of course, if a Eurosceptic government is formed, well then every discussion about reforming Europe, or even, I wouldn't say the survival of Europe, but certainly is going to be back in the agenda.
Wow, a fascinating note on which we're going to have to leave it. Edoardo Bressanelli from King's College London, thank you very much for your expertise.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Good morning, Vietnam. A US aircraft carrier will dock in the country for the first time since the war ended more than 40 years ago.
Also coming up on the programme, it's the most open Oscars for years. So just who will come out on top at this year's ceremony?
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories this hour. Exit polls in Italy suggest that no group has won a majority following the country's general election.
Delegates at China's annual parliamentary session are expected to rubber stamp a proposal allowing President Xi Jinping to rule for life. Well, let's take a look at some front pages from around the world, and we start with the South China Morning Post, which is leading with a message from China that it doesn't want a trade war with the US. A National People's Congress official has told the paper that the right way to handle conflict is to open markets and find solutions acceptable to both sides. And the Japan Times is also leading with Japan's concerns about planned US tariffs on steel and aluminium. The paper says Japan's trade chief has spoken to the US Commerce Secretary on the phone to convey Tokyo's concerns over President Trump's plan. And finally, the international edition of the New York Times, it quotes American and UN officials saying that Egypt has purchased North Korean weapons and allowed North Korean diplomats to use their Cairo embassy as a base for military cells across the region. The paper says that Egypt's military dealings have breached sanctions against North Korea and angered the US. Those are the paper. Let's go back to the top story of the Italian election, Kasia.
Yes, absolutely, because Karin Giannoni, our colleague, has been monitoring the latest on that election from Rome. And Karin spoke a little earlier to Lara Comi from the Forza Italia party, the party of the former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi.
I'm waiting for the final results because I think that the exit poll, yes, it's more or less the intention of the voting, but I'm waiting for the final results. I'm happy because now my coalition is first in the first position because the Movimento 5 Stelle now is not at the same level, but we're waiting for.
Just looking at the Forza Italia figures, 12.5% to 15.5%, the same as your coalition partners to the far right of you, the 12.5% to 15.5%. Is this the end of Silvio Berlusconi in Forza Italia?
No, absolutely not, because I think that we will check at the end, but the results is good for us. We also have the regional campaign in Lombardia and in Lazio, and it's important also the Forza Italia results in this region. I think that it is important to understand what's happened tomorrow, because at the moment nobody is able to organize and to create a government.
Now, for the first time since the end of the Vietnam War, the United States has sent an aircraft carrier to the country. The nuclear-powered USS Carl Vinson arrived this morning in Da Nang in a visit intended to symbolize the growing military ties between the two countries and continuing U.S. interest in the region. Well, for more on this, we can speak to Jonathan Head, who is in Da Nang. Jonathan, so what exactly is the U.S. hoping to achieve by sending this?
Well, the official line is they're simply maintaining peace and stability in the region and showing friendship to Vietnam. And of course, it's a very powerfully symbolic location. This almost exactly 53 years ago, this, or just a few kilometers up along the beach, was where the very first US combat troops arrived to fight the communist government here in the Vietnam War. Today, the US carrier is coming to cement what is a very gradually growing friendship between these two countries. It's been building for a long time. And interestingly, although there was a fear here that under President Trump the US would disengage, particularly after it pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of which Vietnam is a key member, in fact the Trump administration in military terms has remained very engaged with Vietnam. And this carrier visit, and they're very spectacular, these carriers, when they arrive. They're very powerful. There are more than 70 aircraft on board, is a symbolic show of that friendship. But of course, you can never forget the geostrategic problems in this region, in the South China Sea, which is just off Da Nang. The US is operating what they call freedom of navigation passages by its Navy ships through the South China Sea to challenge China's growing presence there. China's been building these military facilities on islands that Vietnam and at least 3 other countries in this region also claim. So the US is also to some degree showing some solidarity with Vietnam in its differences with China.
But are the relationships between Vietnam and the US as close as they appear to be? Because, of course, as you say, they fought a very bitter battle.
Yes, I don't think this interesting. I mean, for a long time, there's been very little sign of bitterness left over from the Vietnam War. It's remarkable, really, when you think of the immense destruction this country experienced during that conflict, how little recrimination there is. Most Vietnamese have a very positive view of the Americans. But when it comes to embracing some kind of military partnership with the United States, the communist leadership here is a great deal more cautious. They definitely want the US engaged. They've been trying for many years to have the US interested in this region because of their fear of domination by China. But so far the military cooperation is very much on what you call non-traditional areas, things like disaster response, humanitarian work, Coast Guard capabilities. The Vietnamese, although the arms embargo was lifted by President Obama 2 years ago, are not buying large amounts of American equipment, nor are their military exercises. Vietnam is very conscious that although it wants lots of parties engaged in the complex diplomacy of this region, it cannot afford to offend China. And in fact, military ties with China are much deeper and more frequent than they are with the United States. Remember, China is still this country's biggest trading partner, and they do share a border of more than 1,000 kilometers long.
Jonathan Head in Da Nang, thank you.
Now, the annual Oscar ceremony are underway in Hollywood. We have had a first award announced. Sam Rockwell has won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Well, with all the action, the BBC's Peter Bowes joins us. And Peter, we've had a result. What a tumultuous backdrop to these Oscars.
Well, yes, it is the issue, of course, that has overwhelmed the entire awards season. The allegations of sexual harassment, which started, of course, with Harvey Weinstein back in October of last year. And when Jimmy Kimmel opened the Oscars with his comedic monologue, yes, there were a few laughs, but it was, I think, much more serious than usual. And he attacked this issue head-on, talking about Harvey Weinstein, saying that what happened to him he deserved. He said it was a situation where the entire world was watching the response of Hollywood. He also encouraged the winners of the awards, as the next 3 or 4 hours unfold, to use their acceptance speeches as a platform. Talk about whatever's on their mind, but he specifically said issues like equality and Hollywood people having an equal platform. Very much in his mind is the issue of women's rights and the issue that, as you say, has so dominated the last few weeks. So I think we'll hear much more about that as the evening goes on. But of course the Oscars are about the movies, and you mentioned Sam Rockwell is the first winner for Best Supporting Actor, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is one of the favourites to win Best Picture. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the films. And joining me is the BBC's Tom Brook, presenter of Talking Movies, and Angela Hutchinson, who is a casting director and also a documentary maker. Let me get your thoughts. First of all, Tom, on Sam Rockwell, winning for the Billboards movie. That was really very expected, wasn't it?
It was a very expected result, and I think it's a very just reward. You know, he's an actor who's been around for a long time, doing a lot of very different character parts, doing some parts really well. He was brilliant in a film called Moon, brilliant in a film called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. So his time had come, so to speak. But he really had the most flashy role in 3 Billboards. It was really showy. He played this bigoted cop. He did it really well. And I think everyone was very impressed, and a lot of people thought he would win tonight.
And Angela, I talk about the way that they have so far talked about this issue of sexual harassment, really addressing it head-on.
Yes.
In the opening monologue. Is it what you expected?
It is, and I'm glad that he, you know, it takes a chance to actually talk about issues like that head on, you know, and so I think it's important that he did that. You know, I produced a documentary, Hush, about Hollywood's uncovered sexual harassment a couple years ago, and it's such a prevalent issue in our world, especially in Hollywood, and so it's
You mentioned
great.
that documentary that you made a couple of years ago. One of the messages to come out of your documentary, and this was before this scandal erupted at the end of last year, was if only people would listen.
Right.
Now clearly
exactly.
they are listening now.
And they are, which is great, and I think a lot of the nominees, you know, I'm just so excited about it, all of the diversity, and it's great to see, you know, women getting an opportunity to hopefully have more roles in the future as well.
Now, so of course the Oscars are about the awards themselves and the films, Tom. This is a very difficult year to call, isn't it, in terms of the picture that is likely to win the big prize. Just briefly, which one do you think it's going to be?
When you say which one, it's between two pictures, The Shape of Water and Three Billboards. I think it'll be The Shape of Water.
We shall see. The Oscars are very early on at the moment.